This is VOA Africa.
Good evening, I'm Esther Githu-Ewart. It's Friday, November 22nd. This is Africa 54. Thousands of refugees living in the Democratic Republic of Congo are now returning home to the Central African Republic. German Chancellor Angela Merkel urges more investment in African nations. And in our entertainment segment, the Queen of Afro-Zouk, Monique Seka, opens up about her decades-long career and where she is today. Hundreds of refugees currently living in the Democratic Republic of Congo are making the journey home to the Central African Republic in the first ever voluntary repatriation program from Congo for 172,000 people forcibly displaced from the Central African Republic since 2013. 400 refugees left Thursday in a convoy of 4 trucks and light vehicles from Mole refugee camp to Zongo in Sudu-Bangi province, northern DRC. They continued their journey by boat to Bangui, the capital of the Central African Republic. The start of the program follows a tripartite agreement signed by UNHCR and the governments of DRC and CAR in June 2019. Since the agreement, some 4,000 people have signed up for the program, indicating their wish to go home by the end of 2019. Although some refugees have been organizing their own returns, UNHCR plans to assist 25,000 people by the end of 2020 through this gradual program. Now, following weeks of political turmoil, including violent protests, an alleged coup attempt, and the emergence of 2 competing prime ministers, Guinea-Bissau is holding a presidential election on Sunday that many hope will usher in an era of calm. The poll pits President Jose Mario Vaz against old rival and former Prime Minister Domingos Pereira and 10 other candidates seeking to draw a line under 5 years of turbulence under Vaz, characterized by high-level sackings and a barely functioning parliament. This election represents a milestone of sorts for Guinea-Bissau, which has suffered 9 coups or attempted coups since independence from Portugal in 1974. The West African country's scattered Atlantic islands and unpoliced waters make it a paradise for adventurous tourists and cocaine traffickers en route from South America to Europe. It appears Vaz will be the first democratically elected president to have completed a full term in the country of 1.6 million people. Zimbabwe's health sector and economy is ailing, and some parents of children with disabilities are turning to Healing with Horses Therapeutic Center. The charity, supported by donations, provides horse rides and activities to children with cerebral palsy, a neuromuscular disorder, and other physical and mental challenges. Columbus Mavunga reports from Harare.
This horse trek in Zimbabwe once a week invites children born with cerebral palsy, a neuromuscular disorder. But the children are not just watching the horses. Healing with the Horses Therapeutic Center offers help to kids who cannot afford the recommended speech and physical therapies.
I started 2 years ago. I decided to leave the job I was in, and I've always loved horses and I have a passion for horses. So I wanted to take my passion and use it to help people. So that's basically how we started. The children who come to me are mostly from disadvantaged homes. Not everybody, but the children you saw today are all from very disadvantaged families. So we do this service for free, and we've seen a huge benefit for them.
The charity is supported by donations from companies and individuals with a mission to help heal children and communities. 37-year-old Stanley Zingai brings his 4-year-old child for regular sessions.
At first, my son refused horse therapy, but he changed, and you can see the progress. He couldn't stand, but now he is standing. He couldn't sit, and now he can sit. We started recently, but we can see a big improvement from before we came here. We started 1 month ago.
The United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, says between 1 and 4 in every 1,000 live births in the world are a child with cerebral palsy. UNICEF Zimbabwe's Christine Peter, a former disabilities professor at the University of Cape Town, says horse riding is an effective therapy.
When a child has cerebral palsy, the child experiences several problems, which include that child may have problems with balance, or sometimes their limbs can be stiff, or they are unable to control movement. So horse riding can stabilize or improve the balance of the body, because the weakened muscles and the weak bones. So that's one of the things that I believe is organic and a brilliant approach to addressing the issues of cerebral palsy.
Peter says cerebral palsy can be reduced if pregnant mothers get regular medical checks and are immunized against infectious diseases. Zimbabwe's struggling healthcare sector and economy means horse therapy may be the only option for some. Luckily for children with cerebral palsy, it is also effective and fun. Columbus Mafunga for VOA News, Harare.
The 2019 edition of the Mogadishu Technology Summit brought together Somalis in the tech industry, government representatives, United Nations agencies, investors, and other stakeholders to discuss the importance of innovative solutions in science and technology in the country. In its second year, the three-day event saw various investors and organizations pledge support for the sector. The country's Salam Bank pledged $5 million for the next 3 years to be made available to innovators and entrepreneurs with access to the funds provided through iRise, Somalia's first ever technology innovation hub, which promotes collaboration between innovators and investors. Premier Bank in 2018 injected $1 million into the tech space. About 25% of that amount has already been disbursed to emerging innovators and entrepreneurs. We hear more from Somalia's Minister for Economic Development, Jamal Hassan, and Jocelyn Mason, UNDP Resident Coordinator for Somalia.
Today, Somalia faces, as you all know, challenges in economic, security, and environmental issues. Utilizing the powers of our youth towards the discovery of innovative solutions with the use of science and technology is our best chance in overcoming those challenges. Therefore, the impetus is upon us to channel the resources of our government and our international partners to invest in advancing the capacity of Somalia's youth in scientific and technological fields.
The summit is an excellent opportunity for Somalia's people, and especially young people such as yourselves, to discuss the future of their country and explore new ways to overcome issues like climate change and water scarcity, and ultimately achieve the Sustainable Development Goals through innovation and technology.
About 40 young innovators exhibited various technological inventions. A highlight among them was a blood bank mobile app called Hibeye, which means donor in the Somali language. Now, the Compact with Africa conference, which promotes private investment by G20 countries in Africa, was held this week in Germany. The event follows the marking of the 30th anniversary of the Berlin Wall collapse and the end of the Cold War. A54's Paul Ndiho reports.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel hosted the leaders of 12 African countries in Berlin Tuesday for discussions on boosting investment and trade in Africa. Merkel announced that incentives will be created for companies that decided to invest in Africa.
We believe, and I am deeply convinced about this, that more transparency can encourage more investment in these countries, because for investors from G20 countries, such as German medium-sized companies, it is very, very important that there is trust and that there is transparency, so that it's clear where one is investing and under what conditions.
Germany already has reform partnerships with a number of African nations, including Ghana, Tunisia, and Ivory Coast, Senegal, and Ethiopia. Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo talks about the African product being sold on the international market.
We've now made the conscious decision that we're moving away from a situation whereby we're just exporters and producers of raw materials to ramping up the value chain in our own countries.
Germany put Africa and inclusive growth high on the G20 agenda when it held the rotating president in 2017. The European nation addressed the root causes of mass migration from underdeveloped to developed countries. Rwandan President Paul Kagame says that Africa is ready for business.
Really showcasing how Africa is ripe for business, for investment, and how far we can go. For example, the partnership we have had, Rwanda has had with Volkswagen, Siemens now coming in, and SAP demonstrates the competitiveness of the economies of our continent.
Meanwhile, German Chancellor Angela Merkel recently led a series of commemorations to mark the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, which divided the city during the Cold War. The wall was built by communist East Germany to prevent its citizens from fleeing to more freedom in the West. On November 9, 1989, East Germany border guards, overwhelmed by large crowds, threw open the gates to West Berlin, allowing free passage for the first time since the Berlin Wall was built. The momentous event led to Germany reunification a year later and soon the collapse of the Soviet Union. In Africa, the fall of the Berlin Wall ushered in new hopes of freedom and challenges. In South Africa, the long and hard and apartheid struggle had been gaining momentum nationally and globally. And in 1994, the country became the last African nation to be freed from white rule. According to many historians, the second decade after the Cold War led to democratic progress and setbacks within and among African countries. And even though the number of authoritarian leaders in Africa has declined, there are still some who seized power during the Cold War era and continue to maintain that power. In December 2018, U.S. President Donald Trump unveiled a new U.S. strategy for Africa to combat what was characterized as the predatory practices of China and Russia and their growing influence on the continent. In October, the first Russia-Africa summit was held at the Black Sea resort of Sochi. It opened a new chapter in relations between Moscow and Africa. Russian President Vladimir Putin hosted the African leaders at the conference aimed at boosting economic ties with Africa. Paul Liho, VOA News.
Now to the Horn of Africa, where 3 of the 4 ethnic-based parties in Ethiopia's ruling coalition voted Thursday to become one single party. The newly formed Prosperity Party was created just months ahead of the general election in May. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed says the Prosperity Party is committed to strengthening and applying a true federal system which recognizes the diversity and contributions of all Ethiopians. The Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, which dominated before Abiy became Prime Minister, refused to participate in Thursday's vote, calling it, quote, a total sham, adding the Prime Minister didn't follow the right procedures. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, the Queen of Afro-Zouk opens up about her career. We'll be right back.
I'm Sheka Sali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa.
Today we'll examine the tobacco industry.
We pretty much touch on anything that you can think of. Politics, health issues, human rights issues, you name it, we talk about it. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent. A very, very rare and unique opportunity to interact with their leaders.
The lyrics could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
I'm Clara Frank, and here's what's trending. In Lagos, Nigeria, a group of people living with various chronic illnesses are working on a painting project as part of art therapy. The participants and their caregivers regularly come to the Sickle Cell Foundation offices to engage in art and music sessions alongside regular treatments. The program helps build relationships between patients, caregivers, and healthcare workers. The project has benefited over 15,000 patients, caregivers, and healthcare workers in Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa. Next up, first you see him, then you don't, thanks to a real-life invisibility cloak. Developed by a Canadian company called Hyperstealth, the material bends light around objects, leaving only the background visible to the eye. It doesn't require power, works in any environment, and can conceal people, buildings, vehicles, or aircraft. There are 13 different versions with various features such as the ability to move shadows in different directions and bending the thermal, ultraviolet, and infrared spectrum too, meaning people can fly under multiple radars. And finally, for a surfer, the search for the perfect wave is never over. But surfing enthusiasts in Berlin no longer have to fly to far-flung beaches. They can find the wave of their dreams right on their doorstep. The flow rate can also be specified, meaning the wave can be adapted to the needs of beginners, children, and professionals alike. With a balmy water temperature of 26 degrees Celsius, Berliners dreading a cold winter can escape for at least a little while by booking a surf session. 38 euros buys 60 minutes, taking turns in a small group. And that's what's trending today.
U.S. President Donald Trump and his Republican allies are pushing back against impeachment inquiry testimony and allegations that Trump demanded Ukraine probe his political rival in exchange for military aid. VOA White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara takes a look at whether this strategy is likely to sway the public's viewpoint, including Trump's loyal base of supporters.
The fighting continues at the Ukrainian front line, a 5-year conflict that has taken 13,000 lives, a backdrop to the question of whether President Donald Trump withheld military aid in exchange for a Ukrainian announcement of an investigation on Joe Biden, Trump's political rival. This week, multiple witnesses testified that Trump's allies, personal lawyer Rudy Giuliani and U.S. Ambassador to the EU Gordon Sondland, carried out the president's pressure campaign on Ukraine. On Thursday, Fiona Hill, former top Russia expert on the National Security Council, described her frustration with Sondland in July as he tried to offer Ukrainians a White House meeting in exchange for a probe of former Vice President Joe Biden.
Because he was being involved in a domestic political errand, and we were being involved in national security foreign policy, and those two things had just diverged.
Hill also rebuked a Republican talking point as they defend the president's efforts in Ukraine that Kyiv, not Moscow, was behind the U.S. 2016 election meddling.
This is a fictional narrative that has been perpetrated and propagated by the Russian security services themselves. The unfortunate truth is that Russia was the foreign power that systematically attacked our democratic institutions in 2016.
Meanwhile, Trump continues to reiterate his key message.
This is the final word from the President of the United States. I want nothing.
The president was referring to Sondland's testimony on Wednesday, describing a phone conversation where Trump had told him he wanted no quid pro quo, an angle the president and his Republican allies have been focusing on throughout the hearing.
They, have very much stuck to that language, despite lots of witnesses coming in and describing what is essentially an exchange that is a quid pro quo. Like in the same breath, they're saying, yes, there was this exchange, there was no quid pro quo, as if that language, quid pro quo, was somehow the criteria for deciding whether or not this was improper. So logically, it doesn't quite match up.
Sondland recalled having the conversation with Trump on September 9th, the day House Democrats announced they will investigate the withholding of aid to Ukraine. This could indicate that Trump aimed to exonerate himself in the call. But analysts point out such details may not matter to most Americans.
The ins and outs of this are difficult. Is Trump for Ukraine or against Ukraine? What's happening exactly? That's difficult for most voters to grapple with, which of course is why most voters are going to look to trusted sources to help interpret things. And Democrats are going to look to Democratic sources, and Republicans are going to look to Republican sources.
So far, polls show that the majority of Americans across parties say nothing they hear in the inquiry will change their minds on impeachment or on President Trump. Patsy Widaguswara, VOA News, White House.
People in Israel are expressing mixed reactions to the news that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been indicted on corruption charges. His supporters believe the charges are fabricated, and his opponents are calling for his resignation. Netanyahu is vowing to fight back, but it's not clear how long he can hold on to power after the indictment. VOA's Ladzahuk explains.
The embattled Prime Minister was defiant after Israel's Attorney General announced the indictment Thursday.
This evening, we are witnessing an attempted coup against the Prime Minister with false charges and a contaminated and tendentious investigation process.
Netanyahu has been indicted on charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust in 3 long-running corruption cases. He is seeking to convince his supporters that the country's entire political system is affected by corruption and political bias.
I think you need to be blind in order not to see that something wrong is going on among the police investigators and the prosecution.
Netanyahu's supporters came out to protest the charges following the announcement.
I came to tell Netanyahu you will never march alone. And I came to say that all of the fabricators of this ridiculous and abominable coup attempt won't succeed, simply won't succeed.
But many Israelis say it is time for Netanyahu to resign.
It is unheard of, it is unthinkable that the Prime Minister will continue in office while being indicted for such grave breaches of law. He will stand trial, he will probably also go to jail. He cannot manage a country as difficult to manage as the State of Israel.
The longest-serving Prime Minister in Israel's history, Netanyahu has been unable to form a ruling coalition after 2 back-to-back elections this year. His indictment adds to the concern about the state of the country's leadership.
I am very disappointed that for a whole year we don't have a government. It's disappointing. I don't know what will be. I can't see that another election will lead to results that are very different. It's a little bit of a mess. But we'll see. This is a democracy. Eventually, things have a nature of resolving themselves.
Thursday's announcement further complicates Israel's paralyzed political system, in which neither Netanyahu nor his closest rival, Benny Gantz, has been able to form a government following Israel's second election in September. A third election could be held later this year. Zlatica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
It's time for our entertainment segment, and joining us now is VOA Music Time in Africa host Heather Maxwell with another exciting music for us today. Heather, welcome.
Thank you, Esther. Hello and happy Friday. There are powerful women in African music, Angelique Kidjo, Oumou Sangaré, and from Ivory Coast, there's Monique Seka. Nicknamed Queen of Afro-Zouk music, this veteran songstress joined VOA's Roger Muntu on the RM show here in Washington to discuss what she's been up to and give a taste of some of her music.
The queen of Afrozouk's music stood out at the time when the genre was dominated by French-produced record and led by the powerful Kassav group. Although she gained success across the continent, she explained why her career has recently slowed down.
J'ai fait plein d'albums.
Ouais, ouais.
Ben, je suis là tranquillement. Bon, vous savez,
I have
avec
made
la...
many albums, you know, with piracy and everything. Lots of artists stayed in their little nest to work on other things. I turned to the farming. I work with a little bit of everything that can grow. I grow tomatoes, I grow ginger, a little bit of everything. We cannot stay just like that, because music is great and all, but at a certain time, there is more than just music. You have to do other things too. There are no bad jobs.
Despite her new profession in the farming sector, she hasn't given up on music.
Non, j'ai pas abandonné la musique. Moi, je suis née dans la musique.
No, I did not give up music. I was born in music. My dad, Seka, the two sisters of Ivory Coast music, sisters Komwe, were my grandparents. So I cannot just give up music. I took a little break to do other things, but even when I am in my plantation, I compose music. I am inspired.
Je compose tout juste par l'esprit. Je suis inspiré. Et puis, bon,
Her recent collaborations include young artists and an upcoming album showcasing her best hits.
Il y a plein de jeunes qui m'ont fait de
There are many young people that make beautiful, very beautiful music for me. So I am working slowly, and at the same moment, I prepare an album with more than 30 years of my career. So we are preparing, but I don't want to tell you more about that right now.
Je fais pas de tapage.
Pas de tapage encore. For now, her music is being used to do good across the continent. She continues sharing her talent with humanitarian campaigns such as the fight against Ebola.
En fait, la Guinée-Conakry.
Yes, Guinea-Conakry has called me up to ask me if I could support them a bit. What is support? By writing a song? I gave it all I had. I organized everything. We needed about more than 10 artists. But really, everyone showed up.
Comment dire, mettre cette structure en place. Et Dieu merci, on avait besoin d'une dizaine d'artistes, mais après, vraiment, tout le monde est venu.
And that was our music feature for today. Now, back to you, Esther.
Thank you so much, Heather. And that's our show for today. From all of us here at Africa 54, have a great weekend.